Hi, folks. Brian Trippett here, the Front Porch Conservative. Happy 4th of July to you and your families. I hope you're having a great day celebrating American independence. I thought I would post something today that we did last night on my channel's live stream called Chattin' on the Porch. It's the reading of an essay from Rush Limbaugh. Not the Rush Limbaugh you know, Rush Limbaugh Jr., the great radio broadcaster's father. It has to do with the Declaration of Independence and the men who signed that document. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it helps you to remember that freedom does not come without a cost. Happy 4th of July to you and your families. And with that, please enjoy this video. As you all know, I am a child of talk radio. I grew up listening to guys like G. Gordon Liddy and Ken Hamlin and the legendary Rush Limbaugh, etc. Well, one of the traditions that Rush engaged in was the reading of an essay by his father, Rush Limbaugh Jr., and it had to do with the Declaration of Independence and the men who signed the Declaration. And I, for my part, now that I have my own presence in media, such as it is, I thought it would be good to keep that tradition alive. I think we as Americans need to be reminded of what the founding fathers gave up or went through, or in the end gave the ultimate sacrifice to give us the ability to do what we're doing right now. Hang around together on the internet and be able to talk about stuff. So it's with that in mind that I would like to read an essay written by Rush Limbaugh Jr., the father of our beloved Rush, who we know as Rush Limbaugh III. And the essay is called Our Lives, Our Fortunes, and Our Sacred Honor. It was a glorious morning. The sun was shining and the wind was from the southeast. Up especially early, a tall, bony, red-headed young Virginian found time to buy a new thermometer, which he paid £3, 15 shillings. He also bought gloves for Martha, his wife, who was ill at home. Thomas Jefferson arrived at the State House. Temperature was 72.5 degrees, and the horse flies weren't nearly so bad at that hour. It was a lovely room. Very large, gleaming white walls. The chairs were comfortable, facing the single door with two brass fireplaces, but they would not be used today. The moment the door was shut, it was always kept locked. The room was like an oven. The tall windows were shut so that no loud quarreling voices could be heard by passers-by. Small openings atop the windows allowed a slight stir of air, and also a large number of horseflies. Jefferson records that the horseflies were dexterous in finding the necks, and the silk stockings was nothing to them. All discuss was punctuated by the slap of hands on necks. On the wall at the back, facing the president's desk, was a panoply consisting of a drum sword and banners seized from Fort Ticonderoga the previous year. Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold had captured the place, shouting that they were taking it in the name of the great Jehovah and the Continental Congress. Now the Congress got to work, promptly taking up an emergency measure about which there was discussion but no dissension. Resolved that an application be made to the Committee of Safety of Pennsylvania for a supply of flints for the troops in New York. Then Congress transformed itself into a committee of the whole. The Declaration of Independence was read aloud once more, and debate resumed. Though Jefferson was the best writer of them all, he had been somewhat verbose. Congress hacked the excess away. They did a good job. As a side-by-side comparison of the rough draft and the final text shows, they cut the phrase, by a self-assumed power. Climb was replaced by must read. Then must was eliminated. Then the whole sentence and soon the whole paragraph was cut. Jefferson groaned as they continued what he called their depredations. Inherent and inalienable rights came out certain unalienable rights, and to this day no one knows who suggested the elegant change. A total of 86 alterations were made. Almost 500 words were eliminated, leaving 1,337. At last, after 3 days of wrangling, the document was put to a vote. Here in this hall, Patrick Henry once thundered, "I am no longer a Virginian, sir, but an American." But today, the loud, sometimes bitter argument stilled, and without fanfare, the vote was taken from north to south by colonies, as was the custom. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. There were no trumpets blown. No one stood on their chair and cheered. The afternoon was waning, and Congress no thought of delaying the full calendar of routine business on its hands. For several hours, they worked on many other problems, adjourning for the day. What kind of men were the 56 signers who adopted the Declaration of Independence and who, by their signing, committed an act of treason against the Crown? To each, the names Franklin, Adams, Hancock, and Jefferson are almost as familiar as household words. Most of us, however, know nothing of the other signers. Who were they, and what happened to them? I imagine that many of you are somewhat surprised at the names not there. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Patrick Henry, all of them were elsewhere. Benjamin Franklin was the only really old man. 80 were under the age of 40. 3 of them were in their 20s. Of the 56, almost half, 24 of them, were judges and lawyers. 11 were merchants, 9 were landowners and farmers, and the remaining 12 were doctors, ministers, and politicians. With only a few exceptions, such as Samuel Adams of Massachusetts, these were men of substantial property. All but 2 had families. The vast majority were men of education and standing in their communities. They had economic security as few men had in the 18th century. Each had more to lose from revolution than they had to gain by it. John Hancock, one of the richest men in America, already had a price of £500 on his head. He signed in enormous letters so that His Majesty could now read his name without glasses, and now double the reward. Ben Franklin wryly noted, "Indeed, we must all hang together, otherwise we shall assuredly hang separately." Fat Benjamin Harrison of Virginia told tiny Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, "With me, it will be over in a minute, but you will be dancing on air an hour after I'm gone." These men knew what they risked. The penalty for treason was death by hanging, and remember, a great British fleet was already anchored in New York Harbor. They were sober men. There were no dreamy-eyed intellectuals or draft card burners here. They were far from hot-tempered fanatics yammering for an explosion. They simply asked for the status quo. It was change that they resisted. It was equality with the mother country that they desired. It was taxation with representation that they sought. They were all conservatives, yet they rebelled. It was principle, not property, that had brought these men to Philadelphia. 2 of them became presidents of the United States. 7 of them became state governors. 1 died in office as vice president of the United States. Several would go on to become U.S. senators. 1, the richest man in America, in 1828 founded the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. 1, a delegate from Philadelphia, was the only real poet, musician, and philosopher of the signers. It was he, Francis Hopkinson, not Betsy Ross, who designed the United States flag. Richard Henry Lee, a delegate from Virginia, had introduced the resolution to adopt the Declaration of Independence in June of 1776. He was prophetic in concluding remarks. "Why then, sir, why do we delay longer? Why still deliberate? Let this happy day give birth to an American republic. Let her arise not to devastate and to conquer, but to reestablish the reign of peace and law. The eyes of Europe are fixed upon us. She demands of us a living example of freedom that may exhibit a contrast in the felicity of the citizen to an ever-increasing tyranny which desolates her polluted shores. She invites us to prepare an asylum where the unhappy may find solace and the persecuted riposte. If we are not this day wanting in our duty, the names of the American legislatures of 1776 will be placed by posterity at the side of all those whose memories has been and ever will be dear to virtuous men and good citizens. Though the resolution was formally adopted on July the 4th, it was not until July the 8th that two of the states authorized their delegates to sign, and it was not until August the 2nd that the signers were met at Philadelphia to actually put their names on the declaration. William Ellery, delegate from Rhode Island, was curious to see the signers' faces as they committed the supreme act of personal courage. He saw some men sign quickly, but in no face was he able to discern real fear. Stephen Hopkins, Ellery's colleague from Rhode Island, a man well past 60, as he signed with a shaking pen, declared, "My hand trembles, but my heart does not." Even before the list was published, the British marked down every member of Congress suspected of putting his name to treason. All of them became the objects of vicious manhunts. Some were taken. Some, like Jefferson, had narrow escapes. All who had property or families near British strongholds suffered. Francis Lewis, New York delegate, saw his home plundered, his estates in what is now Harlem completely destroyed by British soldiers. Mrs. Lewis was captured and treated with great brutality. Though she was later exchanged for 2 British prisoners through the efforts of Congress, she died from the effects of her abuse. William Floyd, another New York delegate, was able to escape with his wife and children across Long Island Sound to Connecticut, where they lived as refugees without income for 7 years. When they came home, they found a devastated ruin. Philip Livingstone had all of his great holdings in New York confiscated and his family driven out of their home. Livingstone died in 1778, still working in Congress for the cause. Lewis Morris, the 4th New York delegate, saw all of his timber, crops, and livestock taken. For 7 years, he was barred from his home and his family. John Hart of Trenton, New Jersey, risked his life to return home to see his dying wife. Hessian soldiers rode after him, and he escaped in the woods. While his wife lay on her deathbed, the soldiers ruined his farm and wrecked his homestead. Hart, 65, slept in caves and woods as he was hunted across the countryside. When at long last, emaciated by hardship, he was able to sneak home, he found his wife had already been buried, and his 13 children had been taken away. He never saw any of them again. He died a broken man in 1779 without ever finding his family. The Reverend John Witherspoon, signer and president of the College of New Jersey, later called Princeton. The British occupied the town of Princeton and billeted troops in the college. They trampled and burned the finest college library in the country. Judge Richard Stockton, another New Jersey delegate signer, had rushed back to his estate in an effort to evacuate his wife and children. The family found refuge with friends, but a Tory sympathizer betrayed them. Judge Stockton was pulled from his bed in the night and brutally beaten by the arresting soldiers. Thrown into a common jail, he was deliberately starved. Congress finally arranged for Stockton's parole, but his health was ruined. The judge was released as an invalid when he could no longer harm the British cause. He returned home to find his estate looted and did not live to see the triumph of the Revolution. His family was forced to live off charity. Robert Morris, merchant prince of Philadelphia, delegate and signer, met Washington's appeals and pleas for money year after year. He made and raised arms and provisions which made it possible for Washington to cross the Delaware at Trenton. In the process, he lost 150 ships at sea, bleeding his own fortune and his own credit almost dry. George Clymer, Pennsylvania signer, escaped with his family from their home, but their property was completely destroyed by the British in the Germantown and Brandywine campaigns. Dr. Benjamin Rush, also from Pennsylvania, was forced to flee to Maryland. As a heroic surgeon with the Army, Rush had several narrow escapes. John Martin, a Tory in his views previous to the debate, lived in a strongly loyalist area of Pennsylvania. When he came out for independence, most of his neighbors and even some of his relatives ostracized him. He was a sensitive and troubled man, and many believe this action killed him. When he died in 1777, his last words to his tormentors were, "Tell them that they will live to see the hour when they shall acknowledge the signing to have been the most glorious service that I have ever rendered to my country." William Ellery, Rhode Island delegate, saw his property and his home burned to the ground. Thomas Lynch Jr., South Carolina delegate, had his health broken by privation and exposures while serving as a company commanding in the field. His doctors ordered him to seek a cure in the West Indies, and on the voyage, he and his young bride were drowned at sea. Edward Rutledge, Arthur Middleton, and Thomas Haywood Jr., and 3 other South Carolina signers were taken by the British at the siege of Charleston. They were carried as prisoners of war to St. Augustine, Florida, where they were singled out for indignities. They were exchanged at the end of the war, the British in the meantime having completely devastated their large land holdings and estates. Thomas Nelson, signer of Virginia, was at the front in command of the Virginia military forces, with British General Charles Cornwallis in Yorktown. Fire from 70 heavy American guns began to destroy Yorktown piece by piece. Lord Cornwallis and his staff moved their headquarters into Nelson's palatial home. While American cannonballs were making a shambles of the town, the house of Governor Nelson remained untouched. Nelson turned in rage to the American gunners and asked, "Why do you spare my home?" They replied, "Sir, out of respect to you." Nelson cried, "Give me the cannon," and fired on his magnificent home himself, smashing it to bits. But Nelson's sacrifice was not quite over. He had raised $2 million for the revolutionary cause by pledging his own estates. When the loans came due, a newer peacetime Congress refused to honor them, and Nelson's property was forfeited. He was never reimbursed. He died impoverished a few years later at the age of 50. Of those 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, 9 died of wounds or hardship during the war. 5 were captured or imprisoned, in each case with brutal treatment. Several lost their wives, their sons, or their entire families. One lost his 13 children. 2 wives were brutally treated. All were at one time or another the victims of manhunts or driven from their homes. 12 signers had their homes completely burned. 17 lost everything that they owned. Yet not one defected or went back on his pledged word. Their honor and the nation they sacrificed so much for to create is still intact. And finally, there is the New Jersey signer Abraham Clark. He gave 2 sons to the officer corps in the Revolutionary Army. They were captured and sent to that infamous British prison hulk afloat in New York Harbor, known as the Hell Ship Jersey, where 11,000 American captives were to die. The younger Clarks were treated with a special brutality because of their father. One was put in solitary and given no food. With the end almost in sight, with the war almost won, no one could have blamed Abraham Clark for acceding to the British request when they offered him his sons' lives if he would recant and come out for the king and Parliament. The utter despair in this man's heart, the anguish in his very soul, must reach out to each one of us down through 200 years with his answer, no. The 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence proved by every deed that they made no idle boast when they composed the most magnificent curtain line in history. And for the support of this declaration and with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. I love each and every one of you. If you are not a subscriber to my channel, please do so. Also, please hit the thumbs up button. It would really help me out with the algorithm with both YouTube and Rumble. Please share the video around, spread the word, tell your friends about this little channel. We are a going little concern. We'd like to be a going big concern. Thank you for everything that you're doing to help me grow this channel, and have a happy 4th of July.